Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Patch 9.1.5 is already in its release candidate build. That means it's actually available, ready to be delivered in a little bit over a week. So we actually will be playing this thing very soon. And even if it's a release candidate, we got changes. We got PvE, buffs towards Fury Warriors, Frost Mages, and a few other class adjustments, as well as removing certain time-walking dungeons out of the rotation, replacing them with new ones based on player feedback. They also announced that in the future they'll be doing player services bundles. So if you want to maybe, let's say, movie character servers or change their races or even change their factions, then you might be able to do so in the future and save a little bit of money while doing it for multiple characters at a time, which some players thought that maybe this means some sort of a faction rebalancing in the future. Also, did you know that they're adding a title for players that are doing Mythic Pluses and are pushing to the highest levels? And we're going to be talking about all these things in today's video. But first, majority of you guys watching these videos are still not subscribed. If you watch these videos anyways, you might as well subscribe as well as hit the bell. Especially if you enjoy the regular updates for patch 9.1.5, maybe potentially 9.2 updates in the future, or maybe even 10.0, which means new WoW expansion at some point in the near time. We'll start off with the small class changes. Now, first one would be a change to the conduit for Demon Hunters in 9.1.5 PTR, where they're actually nerfing this conduit by a bit. This still means this conduit is generally a buff from the current patch, so Demon Hunters are still going to see better value from this conduit. They probably nerfed it because Demon Hunters are going to have no more capped AoE. Blade Dance is going to hit multiple enemies, so with this conduit buffing the final hit of Blade Dance by like what, 180 at the highest rank? Yeah, they're probably looking at massive AoE damage, so it still is an improvement. They probably just wanted to keep it more under control. Then there was a change for Restoration Druid, Floral, Recycling, Potency Conduit, where it's actually going to be halved in value in PvP by the looks of it. This is obviously a nerf for Restoration Druids, but it's actually also a nerf for Feral and Boomkin. Druids have a lot of hybrid healing, quite a bit bursty healing too, especially when this kind of healing with the Floral Recycling double dipping into the healing over time effect, together with the Necrolord Swarm healing over time buff. So, Druids were seeing quite big bursty healing, like Feral Druids and Boomies, especially in the 5-5-1-1 duels, but I imagine the stuff they could do in 2s and 3s was also pretty ludicrous. Now, Druids should have some hybrid healing, but they shouldn't basically be a Restoration Druid, and this was actually quite a popular conduit amongst Druids for PvP. Even if it's just mostly a rest conduit, the other specs can use it with Restoration Affinity, so I think this is obviously going to nerf Rest of Burst healing, but also some of that hybrid healing potential. For mages, we have slight buffs towards Flurry, Mastery Icicles, as well as Frostbolt. All these abilities are getting amped in spell power. This is a small buff. This is more for filler abilities like Frostbolt, Flurry, and Mastery Icicles. But at least this is a buff for single target damage, as well as AoE, because even in AoE, you're going to be dropping down massive blizzards on enemies, tossing in your frozen orb, lancing enemies with the ice lances as they split into two, but in between of those abilities, when they're on cooldown, you are frostbolting, you are flurrying, and whenever you lance, you do get icicles shooting out. It's a small buff, but it's probably warranted. Frost Mages are not terrible, in fact they're really popular in Mythic Pluses, but in single target content like a lot of the raid fights and even maybe PvP, they're not the most popular range class in the game. I mean, it's really difficult to compare with Venthyr Druids inside of raids in general, but yeah, their single target damage and filler damage improved is going to be a buff overall. If anything, this is actually quite a significant buff for PvP since Frostbolt and Flurry and Icicles end up being quite a bit of your damage depending on how you build your mage. But Frost was pretty popular at the beginning of 9.1 after the Fire Mage changes and not a lot of players wanted to pick up Arcane, so Frost was this comfort pick for many when it comes to raiding, dungeons, but over time, more players warmed up to Fire, literally warmed up, where they're starting to pick it back up. More players warmed up towards Arcane and figuring out how carrying Arcane works, so Frost kind of fell off a little in popularity, so it probably needed some kind of a small buff. This also adds on to the other changes that Frost Mages are getting in 9.1.5. And for Fury Warriors, we got the weirdest buff ever. They buffed their auto attacks with the Fury Warrior aura by 43%, which sounds like a big number. Imagine any of your class abilities. Think of the hardest hitting ability in the game, but for your class right now, and imagine if that got buffed by 43%. That's huge. However, they're buffing their auto attacks, which results in about a 4% single target damage increase. So it's a really weird buff, but I mean, it kind of makes sense. Fewer warriors are amazing in AoE as long as they can just whirlwind and rampage on enemies, especially those enemies that live for a while in a massive trash bag. If they could just spin to win and bathe in the blood of their enemies for extended amounts of time, they're great at the damage output. Where they kind of suffer is in short fights that are all about burst AoE and in some single target fights. But I wonder if all these changes that we've got today, but also the other changes we've had in 9.1.5 so far, with also freedom to change covenants and be able to be a little bit more flexible on the legendaries you want to try with different builds, I wonder if some of these changes in the overall scope of 9.1.5 might allow, with the freedom we have in the next patch, more opportunity for fewer warriors and frost mages to rise. Maybe a different covenant or a different legendary that might let them do really well. Because these are all small buffs, but they could have pretty decent ripple effects, and I wonder, with more customization and freedom in 9.1.5, if we'll see these two specs kind of on the rise again. Besides that, we have a small change towards some of the time walking dungeons, and this actually is kind of good because Blizzard decided to rotate some of the different time walking dungeons, removing some of the lesser like dungeons, replacing them with some of the more like dungeons. For example, in the Burning Crusade time walking dungeon rotation, we have Alcatraz, the Black Morass, and Slave Pens removed. Black Morass is a bit of a, not a lot of people enjoy that dungeon. It's a lot of just waiting for enemies to spawn, so being replaced with Blood Furnace, Botanica, and Underbog makes a bit more of sense. Wrath of Lich King, they're replacing the Anka Head, the Old Kingdom, Pit of Sauron, and Utgard Pinnacle. Now, I kind of like Pit of Sauron, but there are some mobs that are like weirdly scaled, so they're just a bit overtuned, and there's plenty of opportunities for tanks to just fall over and die if they don't know what they're doing. They're replaced with Ajol and Nerub, I know I said it wrong most likely, the Forge of Souls, and Utgard Keep. For Cataclysm, we have Grimbatol kicking the curb and Blackrock Caverns charging in. I haven't seen Blackrock Caverns in a while, so that's going to be a really interesting one. Mists of Pandaria Time Walking Dungeon, Siege of Nilzao Temple get replaced with Scholomance. And I actually kind of like this change because I like the take of MOP Scholomance. It was quite an enjoyable and a fresh take on a very familiar classic dungeon. Then we have WoD Time Walking with the Iron Docks replaced with Grimrail Depot. Now, Warlords of Draenor was not my most favorite expansion, but Grimrail Depot dungeon was so good. The train sequence at the end is just artistically pleasing, it's very, very different, and I haven't done those fights in quite a while, so I think that'll be a very fresh take. I kind of like the idea of them changing up dungeons, removing some of the ones people didn't like and replacing with some of the ones players would enjoy more. Trust me, I don't want to do Black Morass any more than I have to, but maybe they should have just added new dungeons in instead of replacing the ones that people don't like, or maybe just removed really, really bad ones but kept majority of them in. Because with Legion Time Walking, they're actually doing a very similar thing. They're only including certain dungeons into the Legion Mythic Plus pool. The Archway, the Halls of Valor, Cathedral of Eternal Night, all of them were actually really, really fun. They could add more of them in, except for maybe like Cedar Triumvirate. That one that was added towards the end of Legion. I actually didn't like that dungeon at all. That one they can kind of keep on the side, but add the original ones because they were so good. But how do you guys feel about it? Should they just add more dungeons and just keep the ones that people dislike, or as they're doing it right now, rotating them out so players have new dungeons from older days to re-experience all over again? Let me know in the comments. We also have a brand new title joining us in 9.1.5. There's titles for raiders, titles for PvPers, and now titles for dungeon dwellers, with the Tormented Hero title. If you're at the top end of 0.1% of your faction, which it does seem like this is a global title, so it's not region-based, it's global-based, which means quite a lot of people are probably going to get it. This is a title for players that do high-end M+. What's very interesting is it's a faction title, so if you're someone who likes the Alliance but feels like the Horde has a lot more competitive edge when it comes to looking for groups and looking for raids and PvPing, and the competitive side of the game does seem like it leans currently towards the Horde, but in terms of the actual factions it's more or less 50-50, just the competitive side. There's a lot more players to find and play with on the Horde end. This title is one of those incentives for players to want to stay in your faction. If you just like Alliance or all your friends play Alliance, there's an opportunity for you on this faction, which is definitely an incentive to stay this faction. And what if Blizzard added more incentives in the future to play the faction you really want to, not because one faction is just more popular than the other? This comes together with Blizzard at the same time announcing that they're going to be doing bulk orders for character services in the future. They didn't really say if this is a 9.1.5 feature or like a 9.2 or maybe a future feature in like the next expansion or something. but they did mention that they want to add some sort of a bulk order feature. This is great because let's say if my guild for some reason falls apart, and this guild has been around since TBC, but what if it implodes tomorrow and I need to transfer my main and a bunch of alt characters? I do want to play my alts, and I kind of want to keep them on the same server, same guild as I'm in, so it will make sense for me to just do a bulk order. I'll save a bit of money and I'll be able to move my characters at once, or if let's say some sort of cool new customization comes out, like for 9.1.5. Nightborn, High Mountain, or for the Alliance, Void Elves and Lightforge are getting all these cool new customizations. And what if you just wanted to spruce up your alts so you have less Blood Elves and less Humans and Night Elves, and instead something different, something new, with some of the newer, cooler customizations? The bulk orders, players notice, could be used for faction swapping if let's say you wanted to take all your characters and switch a faction, which would be a lot easier. And I wonder if with this title that they added for Mythic Pluses, and what if they added more incentives in the future? What if this bulk order is kind of like as a setup? What if part of the project going forward is to try to find a way to make both factions a little bit more even in the competitive side? Because as I mentioned earlier, the factions are more or less 50-50, it's just the competitive side, high Mythic Pluses, competitive rating for titles and rankings, maybe competitive PvP, it does seem like Horde benefits a little bit more at the top end. Or at least that's what a lot of players have assumed with Blizzard making this kind of announcement. Nothing confirmed of what exactly the bulk order will look like, and nothing confirmed on what incentives could be, or if there's any incentives to begin with. But what if there were? It would be a perfect storm of a setup together with the bulk orders and the customization changes and maybe a faction reset of some sort. A lot of players got excited that maybe all the what ifs could at some point come true. I just want to gauge you guys' thoughts on that idea. Do you think at some point is it possible, or maybe they should do like you could just do raids and dungeons cross-faction like some players have suggested? Thank you all so much for watching. What do you guys think about everything we talked in this video? Let me know in the comments, but thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. I would appreciate it, and I'll see all of you guys in the next update.